Brew Strong is brought to you by Blickman Engineering, home of the top-tier brewing stand. Visit them online at blickmanengineering.com.
Brewers, it's time for the beer radio you've been looking for. This is the show that dispels myths, tackles the toughest topics, and makes no apologies for geeking out on beer. Hosted by two guys that drink before they think, Jamil Zainasheff and John Palmer. This is Brew Strong.
Hey, howdy, hey, my brewing brothers and sisters. John and I are not in the studio this week. We're out on the yacht Brew Strong, sipping pina coladas on the poop deck. But don't fret, because we pulled together some of our favorite topics from past shows for you to enjoy once again. It's sort of like eating too much and then you partially vomit later, but since it didn't leave your mouth, it isn't really vomit, so you swallow it again and it tastes okay. Except this will be a whole lot better, I promise you. In the first segment of this Best of Brew Strong, John and I cover fermentation temperature control. Controlling fermentation temperature is extremely important, and it makes a world of difference in your beer. In this episode, we cover everything from fermentation temperatures to using an air conditioner to control a larger space. And I really love the part about the thermometer device from 1762. It's awesome stuff, and I hope you enjoy. One of the most critical things as far as, making great beer is temperature control. That's one of the things I've always ranted about. Don't be buying conicals, don't be buying, stainless steel sculptures and things like that until you have your temperature control. You should be getting yourself a fridge and a controller and all that. Of course, not everybody has that amount of money, and there are a lot of options and a lot of different ways to do it, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Well, and, Joe is really cool. One of the things he has is a book from 1762 that belonged to President John Adams. He actually has the book that John Adams owned.
Really? Wow.
And it's this brewing book. And in it, it has this paragraph on temperature control. And I don't like to read things on the air because it really kind of sucks. But I just thought this was amazing. It's like in the book it says, I know very well good beers were sometimes, perhaps often, made before the thermometer was known. Okay, this is 1762. And still is by many who are entirely ignorant of it. But this, if not wholly the effect of chance, cannot be said to be very distant from it. They who carry on this process, unassisted by principles and the use of the thermometer, must admit they are frequently unsuccessful, whereas did they carefully and with knowledge apply this instrument, they certainly would not be disappointed. It is equally true, the brewing art, for a long space of time, has been governed by an ill-conveyed tradition alone. If lucky combinations have sometimes flattered the best practitioners, faulty drinks as often made them feel the want of certain and well-established rules. It is just as absurd for a brewer to refuse the use of the thermometer as it would be for an architect to reject the informations of his plummet and rule and to assert they were unserviceable because the first house and probably many others were built without their assistance. Back in 1762, this dude here was on the internet doing his shows on the Brewing Network and saying, look, you should be using a thermometer. You balloon heads out there, I know, and that's the thing. You get people go, well, I make great beer and I don't have any fermentation temperature control. It all turns out perfect. I just let it go. Yeah, it's 100 degrees out. Yeah, it's, but you get that variable results. You're getting beers that don't attenuate fully. You're getting beers that have a lot of diacetyl, acetaldehyde, a lot of these characters that you really don't want. Uncontrolled, fusel alcohols, esters, things like that. So
Belgians.
And now Belgian, and that's also the thing. A lot of times people go, well, it's Belgian, doesn't matter, do whatever. It's like, no. Even Belgians, temperature control, or even more so, temperature control, very important. And you're going to make so much better beer with temperature control. That's why after full wort boil, so you get yourself a big enough pot, and you're still extract brewing, right? you don't go to all grain. What you do is you get yourself fermentation temperature control. And, figure out how to control the temperatures of your ales and lagers to make, the best beer possible, right? That's the big thing. So I think, I think if you're not doing that, then you're really not serious about making good beer if you're not controlling your temperature. So what about Joe's question, John? He's saying, look, here in Boston, certain times of year, ambient temperature can swing like 50 degrees. Over short periods of time. He's had he's hit 90 on one day and then frost a couple days later. So he's been brewing with the seasons, but it's still a little hit or miss. So where can we go? How does somebody start out on a budget? What? Give me the basics, and we'll kind of go from there. What do you think? We'll go from there and we'll kind of build on it and say what your next step up would be.
Okay, I guess the most basic would be an enclosed space, such as a closet. If you put your fermenter in the closet, it'll probably be more stable in the closet than it would be in the room at large.
Away from the sunny side of the house. So if you've got a closet on the interior of your house, that one's going to be cooler. Or if you have a part of your house that's always shady. At my old house, I had a bathroom that was on a patio, and the patio was covered, and so it was always shaded. Even grew moss out there, so that bathroom was always nice and cool and steady. Something like that. If you get the sun shining on a wall, it really heats up the room. So, stay away from rooms like that.
Yeah, if even in even in an interior room, you still have too much temperature swing. Setting your fermenter into a large bucket full of water is a way to increase the thermal mass of the system and reduce the amount of temperature swing.
So you could even put it in a bucket or a bathtub.
Right.
You could fill up a bathtub with water, and it doesn't even have to be cold water necessarily. You start out with cold water, but it'll, like John's saying, the entire tub needs to now change. So it'll buffer those swings in temperature. Now, if it's hot continuously, obviously the temperature is going to rise, but it'll take much longer. Right.
And you can always add ice bottles to that bath, to help keep that bath's temperature down. And you don't have to get it ice cold. You're looking for something in the 60s, so a couple ice bottles will work very well to help keep that water cool and to help reduce, help keep the maximum temperature that where it sees is fermenting, getting above say 75.
Well, and maybe we should talk about the critical aspect of fermentation temperature control is to prevent really wild swings. It would be better.
Right.
Okay, let's say you have a recipe that's saying ferment at 67 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, instead of starting at 65, letting it go up to 68, and then back down to 65, and then up to 68, or 70, 65 to 70, 65 to 70, that type of thing. Because what's going to happen is the yeast are going to start fermenting like crazy. They're going to start out slow. It's going to get up to 70. They're going to start fermenting like crazy. They may go for a couple of days, and then it's going to drop down to 65 again. And the yeast are going to be on the tail end, and they're just going to drop out of solution. They're going to they're going to go to sleep, and they're not going to clean up a lot of those remaining sugars, those things like acetaldehyde, acetal, and you're going to end up with a nasty beer. So it would be better than chasing 65 or chasing 67 to just let it ferment at 70 and just keep it steady at 70. So a steady fermentation temperature or a very slowly rising fermentation temperature to the end is much more ideal than one that goes up and down, up and down.
Yeah, we talked about that in our lagering shows where you if anything, you want to start cooler and let the beer rise gradually over the length of the fermentation. It's if you're going to have warm fermentation, then a steady state warm fermentation at say 70 degrees is better than, as you're saying, Jamil, than a fluctuating temperature from 65 to 70 and back down, because you're going to end up forming more precursors, more of the diacetyl, more of the acetaldehyde, and then the yeast, when it cools down, are going to stop conditioning those and refining those byproducts, and you're going to end up with a bad beer. If you can, and the other key point is, don't let that beer start at 80 and then stick it in an ice bath and cool it down to 60, because they're going to produce tons of precursor at 80, and as that beer cools down in the bath to, say, 60 degrees over 3 days, when most of that fermentation is finished, you're going to have just tons of precursor left over, and all your yeast has gone to sleep.
Yeah, so you want those yeast to get real active at the end and suck up the dregs of what they're they're getting greedy, finding stuff to make energy out of before they go dormant, and you want them to be sucking up diacetyl and acetaldehyde and stuff like that. So that's why that rising temperature rather than a falling temperature is more important. So I've got an interior room, and I've added a bucket of water, but, it's getting hotter and hotter and hotter outside. I live in Sacramento, or near Sacramento, and it's 110. And for some reason, I haven't turned on the air conditioner. So it's 110 in my house. What do I do next? What's my next step?
Well, you go back to your closed space model, but now you're going to add some active cooling to it. Get a room air conditioner and just cool down that room. A room air conditioner, one of the small ones from Home Depot, it'll run you $100, $120. You can probably find them online for cheap too. I think I bought one a couple of years ago for $80, and a 5,000 BTU 18-inch kind of cube air conditioner can chill down a room to maintain 65, no problem. Or you can go to a box, build yourself a box. It could be a cardboard box, and stick that room air conditioner on the cardboard box. It'll work. It'll cool down that local area and help me.
Well, and I see how that would work.
We forgot one key
element. That
element.
sounds kind of pricey to me. I mean, let's say I'm like Justin, where I'm begging for ramen and condoms. So, what's the there's got to be a cheaper stage than that, right? How about the wet T-shirt and fan thing? I see that on the internet all the time. I've never done it. That
works good in dry areas, yeah.
Okay, so if it's dry enough where the water will evaporate off the T-shirt, you drape a T-shirt over your carboy or a towel. Terry cloth towel really works well, better than a T-shirt.
Yeah, that's true.
Wrap a terry cloth towel on there, put a clothespin on it, or a safety pin to hold it around the carboy. Let the ends of the towel sit in that bath of water, and then blow a fan across it. And that fan, so almost everybody has a fan and a towel at their house, right? And that wind blows across the towel. It increases the evaporation rate of the water that's soaking up through the terry cloth towel. And it'll cool it down, what do they say, like 5-10 degrees?
Yeah, but that works best in dry areas. If you're in a humid area, such as Virginia, it's not going to work very well. But, that is a good, cheap way to get some extra cooling out.
And then the step above that would be, the little window AC unit. Now, I've been able to pick up fridges for $25. And, you can get yourself the controller and hook that up. And that's been pretty good. Now, why not go that route?
That is a really good route to go. Get a spare fridge, and you can pick them up off Craigslist, like you say, or, eBay, or, various used fridges or whatever. You can get those, for cheap, and get yourself a temperature controller, like a Johnson or a Ronco. And put the probe inside the fridge, attach it, tape it to your carboy, and that will help you maintain a very consistent temperature.
Well, and that's what I use. I use fridge, and then I love my Johnson, and
you tape it to your carboy all the time, don't you?
I put my probe on my carboy, and I guess the drawback to this is. It takes up a lot of room. So if you don't have, you're not going to wheel the fridge into the, into the house and put it in the bedroom, and
stick it in the garage.
Well, if you're married, you're certainly not doing this. But if you're living with a frat house, then I'm sure this is fine. But yeah, you need to put it in the garage or somewhere, and then almost any fridge will work. The question often is that I see is, should I use a fridge or should I use a freezer? And I've always leaned towards the fridge because the temperatures that you want to do your fermentation at are more fridge temperature like. Even when you're lagering, it's fridge temperature. Fridge temperature is just below 40. It's like 36 degrees, and they'll go down to 32, and they'll go up to 40 or 45, or 50. Now, and so with lagers, you can almost even dial it in with the fridge controller. So a cheap way to do lagers. If you're trying to do ales, you want a warmer, right? Now, a freezer isn't meant to carry away the condensation like a fridge is. A fridge is designed to pull all that condensation out, and, there's frost-free and all that stuff. With a freezer, you tend to catch a lot of moisture in those things, and people have a lot of moisture problems.
Yeah, mold.
Mm-hmm.
Easy to get mold in a freezer.
So people end up using those buckets of damp rid or whatever to soak up the moisture in there. I prefer just going with a fridge. Fridge is cheaper to start with usually, and then you can put your stuff in there.
Yeah.
I hook up.
And lifting 6 gallons of wort over the edge of a chest freezer and down in is not easy for us middle-aged guys
or old guys like me.
Yeah. It's hard on your back. So a fridge, it's a lot easier to squat down and lift the carboy, the one vertical foot to slide it in on the bottom shelf there in the fridge.
Right. And, as far as controllers go, they got the Johnson, they got the Ranco, they got the old Johnsons with the metal probe. And those are okay. You got to be real careful you don't kink that little line that it's an open tube that air pressure and works off of air pressure, so you don't want to kink that tube. The later ones, they're electronic and they're a lot more durable. But I like some of the Johnsons. The ones that I have right now, I haven't been in the market for a controller for quite a while. But the Johnsons will have a anti-short cycle setting. So, you have this fridge, and it's got a compressor. If you run the compressor for a while and then stop it and restart it and stop it and restart it, you can end up with some issues on the compressor, shortening the life of the compressor. So what you want is this anti-short cycle. It gives a 20-minute delay. So if the thing's just been running, it won't run again for 20 minutes, and that actually extends the life of your compressor. That's a nice thing. Now, on the Rancos, they'll have ones that are two-stage. And what I want to do is, you hook up those two-stage, you can do, heating and cooling all at the same time. So that's very, very cool. Very good. All right, well, let's take a break. Back after this.
Keep your carboy cap on. This is Brew Strong.
We'll be right back. When you hear Blickman Engineering, think innovation, passion, quality, and customer service. Blickman gear is designed by brewers to give you a sense of pride in your equipment. At Blickman, they know what makes brewing a pain and build gear that makes it fun. Like the intuitive beer gun, a completely different approach to filling bottles. The Therminator Wort Chiller, a new take on a plate chiller that's sized for flow, performance, and the high groundwater temps homebrewers face every day. The Brewmometer, a brilliant weldless thermometer design with brewing parameters right on the dial. The Autosparge, ultimate simplicity for preventing an overflow or running your mash tun dry. And much more, like the modular top-tier brewing stand, conical fermenters, and their Boilermaker brew pots. With more cutting-edge equipment coming soon. Keep up with the latest from Blickman at blickmanengineering.com and stay on the cutting edge.
Whether I'm making me dry stout or rebuilding me kegs, I head to the heart of dear Dublin for me homebrewing supplies.
You head all the way back to Emerald Isle just for a wee batch of grain or a bit of keg tubing?
No, you moronic waste of liver. Dublin, California. I go to HopTech.
For 30 years, HopTech in Dublin, California has been supplying homebrewers with malt extract, fresh grains, hops, spices and sugars, hop oils and extracts, and much more. HopTech is one of the first homebrew supply shops on the internet and is proud to offer award-winning beer kits, both online and in their store.
Mention the BN Army for a 10% discount off your order.
The store is open every day except Wednesday, or shop online at hoptech.com anytime. HopTech is run by passionate, award-winning brewers who live, love, and travel for beer and bring their experience to the store for you.
If you don't want to visit Dublin, just call toll-free 800-DRY-HOPS or go to hoptech.com.
Visit HopTech today in Dublin, California and at hoptech.com.
Nico, listen, our lawyers said that we had to do this for 1 hour, and after this, we don't have to talk to each other for 3 more months to the next meeting.
Kids, come on, let's get out of here.
I'm supposed to have more lines. I'm the professional. Hey, it's Sully.
And I'm Nico.
And we opened the 21st Amendment 10 years ago at 563 2nd Street in San Francisco, just 2 blocks from Giants Park, to make great beer and have a great time doing it.
That's right, because to us, the 21st Amendment is more than just the right to make beer. It's the right to experiment, to be innovative, and just do things differently. And so now, we're putting our craft beer in cans.
That's right, cans. You can find our world-famous Hell or High Watermelon Wheat Beer at Brew for Your Die IPA in the Northeast, Northwest, parts of the Midwest, and Alaska, in cans and on draft. So next time you're at your local neighborhood pub or good beer store, be sure to ask for 21st Amendment in cans.
Because everyone likes it in a can.
Tasty crack cans.
Tasty crack can.
And now, Northern Brewer brings you another installment of The Time Brewers.
When last we left our heroes, they found themselves in 1842 in the province of Bohemia.
Yo, this era jerky. All the beers is murky.
What ho, friends? A male alewife.
I don't know what I'm doing, so I got this dark malt, yeah? More stinky dark beer, yeah.
No, sir. Please, wait. Just a moment.
Hi, a package from the future from Northern Brewer.
Use the Pilsner malt, my good man. And these Sots hops, sucker. They ain't noble like Queen Victoria, but you can use Sterling from Portland to Astoria. Let your wort caramelize and let melanoidins harmonize in a long boil. Keep your starter under cover with aluminum foil. Boo.
And useth thou some bog myrtle.
Northern Brewer is your one-stop homebrew supplier throughout the entire fermento chronosphere. The widest selection of quality malt, hops, yeast, $7.99 flat rate shipping, and get your nasty-ass bog myrtle back to the dark ages, Brother Abelard.
Hey, this golden lager with the happy hops pretty damn good. Thanks, Time Brewers. Thanks, Northern Brewer.
Our work here is done, my friends. Now, to wherever we are next needed.
Tune in next time for the continuing adventures of The Time Brewers.
Hilo, what's it feel like?
Take awesome and multiply it by 2.
Yeah! Spraying live beer radio all over your face.
Can't get any better than this, baby.
It's the Brewing Network.
Back to your hosts, Jamil Zainasheff and John Palmer. Putting the testicles in technical. This is Brew Strong.
This next segment covers another really popular topic, repitching yeast. Lots of people ask how to reuse yeast, not because they're cheapskates, but because repitching yeast can result in a really fantastic fermentation character. Whether you're trying to get a really clean beer, or a particular ester profile, or you just want to make sure you get proper attenuation of your beer. In this episode, John and I cover everything from how to collect, how to rinse, how to determine exactly how much yeast to pitch. It's really chock full of great information. I hope you enjoy. So, repitching yeast, when you ferment a batch, and you rack that beer out into your bottling bucket or into your keg or what have you, you may notice at the bottom there's a lot more yeast than what you started with. You added a certain amount of yeast. Maybe you added a vial of White Labs or a pack of Y yeast or maybe even dry yeast. The volume of yeast at the bottom of the carboy or bucket or conical is much more than what you started with. Well, you could take that yeast and you can reuse it. There's some kind of specialized rules about reusing that yeast and how you go about reusing it, and that's what we're going to talk about. And but you can actually make another batch of beer from that yeast, and it may even turn out better than the first batch.
Why would you do that? I mean, I can go down to my local homebrew shop, pick up a fresh vial of yeast, pitch that right in. We've already had a show on starters. You could do that. Why would you repitch your yeast?
That's an excellent question.
Again, I'm baffled. Why is any homebrewer going to go to the trouble to do that?
When you can just go and buy more yeast.
Yeah.
Well, a couple things. The most obvious that I think people will key on is, well, it's going to be much cheaper for me. I don't have to go buy yeast a second time. I can just reuse that yeast, right? Well,
and you may not need to make a starter either. There's that convenience factor.
And the other thing, though, and you ask any professional brewer, they'll tell you that first pitch off a new package of yeast, it'll do well, and you'll get good fermentation. But the second pitch off that yeast is even better, and then the third pitch, really, the yeast kind of seem to hit their stride. You're selecting for yeast that do well in that beer or whatever it is, but that's where the yeast are really humming along and the beer really seems great.
So it sounds like if you're not repitching your yeast, you could be at a disadvantage then potentially.
Right. I think the best beers actually are made from repitched yeast.
Well, there you go. One other thing.
Yeah. So that comes with a lot of caveats. As far as health and sanitation and things like that.
So the fellow who wrote in the email there, he obviously had this big slurry, and I know a lot of people are just saying, hey, just take that and dump it right into the next batch, right?
Yeah, a lot of people say that's what they do. They just dump new wort on the yeast cake, and there you go, it works perfectly. Well, I'm not so sure that's true.
Right.
Now, you're done with fermentation, so here we are. I'm done. I've finished my primary fermentation. Maybe I've done a secondary fermentation. Am I going to be using the yeast off of the primary or the secondary? What do you think?
Well, go ahead, John.
Yeah, generally off the primary. If you're harvesting from the secondary, generally that's you've tended to select in the secondary for less flocculent yeast, or you've pitched in the secondary with added fruit juice or puree or something. So it isn't exactly your prime strain at that point.
Right. Well, one problem you can have is if you start selecting for the less flocculent yeast, you end up with it becomes powdery. It'll stay in suspension. It won't clear. And that happens very quickly with especially lager strains. And that is the type of beer that people tend to want to do secondaries, and then they want to collect this clean yeast off the bottom and use that, and it gets real powdery real quick and won't flocculate, and it also changes attenuation. Those less flocculent yeast tend to be more attenuative. They tend to finish out sugars more. So you really want you don't want the first yeast that drops, and you don't want the last yeast that drops. You want that section
middle of the road. Yeah,
that's why with the conical fermenters, brewers will often drop that first section of yeast, and then they'll use the chunk in the middle, and then they'll discard the last portion.
Okay, so for the rest of the world that doesn't have conicals, right, and it sounds like you're taking it most likely from your primary. You don't even do a secondary fermentation.
Right. This primary secondary thing drives me nuts. You put it in the fermenter, you ferment, and then when it all completely drops clear, the beer's done, and then you can select your yeast from that. For people who are using buckets or carboys, the best way to do this is get yourself. I prefer a sterile container. So what I use is these Nalgene type. They're polypropylene or polyethylene, I'm not sure. You put them in You get them in liter, 2 liter, half-liter sizes. I put them in a pressure cooker with a couple drops of water in them and sterilize them, 250 degrees, 22 minutes, 23 minutes. So I know they're sterile. When I rack my beer out of my carboy or bucket or whatever it might be, I'll swirl the carboy around to break up the yeast cake on the bottom. I leave like a half inch of beer in there, swirl it real good, break everything up, and then I will flame the opening on the carboy, and then pour that into the sterile container, and then I put it in the fridge, and that's all I do with it.
You put it in the fridge. So okay, now you have a huge amount of yeast. I mean, that's right. You look at the bottom of that carboy; it's pretty thick, even in a 5-gallon batch.
Right.
How long is this going to be good for?
Well, ideally, you want to use the yeast as soon as you possibly can. The sooner you use it, the better off it's going to be. What happens to the yeast when they go into that stationary phase? They start consuming their reserves. Their energy reserves are being consumed, keeping themselves alive and steady and all that.
Yeah, their carbohydrate reserves, glycogen and trehalose.
Mm-hmm. And that's going to eventually be depleted. The yeast will start consuming themselves, and you end up with just a kind of a rotting mess that smells like meat, and it gets pretty nasty.
In the BN studio, right?
Right. Like a BN crotch.
Right.
And so ideally you want to use that. Now, different strains of yeast are going to store better than others. As far as something like Cal Ale or 1056, it will store pretty stable for a couple of weeks without a lot of loss of viability. You get something like the wheat yeasts tend to go south really fast, is what I've discovered. And I've heard both Chris White from White Labs and Dave Logston from Y Yeast say that the lager yeasts don't store very well, and that they go south really fast. But I've found that they are as good as the Cal Ale and the others, but I don't know if that's the way that I'm handling them or what, but they both seem very certain, and I trust those guys as far as what they're saying about that.
So you swirled it off. You now put it in your Nalgene or plastic container. Now, what if you don't have a Nalgene bottle? Is there any other container? I mean, can I use my 1 liter water Crystal Geyser water bottle?
Well,
put a funnel or something.
You can use.
I use glass jars.
Well, and the thing about glass is fine. You don't want to seal those off to where they're going to pressurize and shatter the glass, because there can still be a generation of gas. So don't put a hard top on the glass jar. Either leave it loose or cover it with foil or cling film and a rubber band, and that'll be good as well. The nice thing about the plastics that I use and glass is generally you can sanitize those with heat.
I use mayonnaise jars, put half an inch of water in the bottom, and just loosely rest the cap on top and stick it in the microwave for a couple minutes. Let the water boil in there. Heat sanitize the inside.
Okay,
so that's a nice way to do it. Some of the other plastics, like the water balls and stuff, they're not stable under heat, so they'll melt on you. Yeah. So it's nice if you can heat sanitize something, because it tends to be very effective and very cheap.
And it sounds like if you're going to be using this yeast more than once, you introduce a little bacteria, something that's not sanitary, and you could screw up the rest of your beer.
Right. Well, and keep in mind this, and this is one of the things about repitching yeast. When every time you brew, the thing's not sterile, right? There's your sanitization of the carboy or bucket or whatever you're using. There's any lines you're using to transfer. There's exposure to the air. I mean, the air is just filled with dust. Even though you don't really see it, it's filled with dust. And on those dusts, it's
you have some degree of contamination every time.
Every time you brew. So just starting off, you got some contamination in there. every time you repitch this yeast. Now, when you go and you start and you pitch this yeast into your next brew, you're pitching some bacteria or wild yeast, perhaps, in with the good yeast. The nice thing is you're pitching enough yeast that it should readily outcompete it. But again, you will have some increase. You got another set of transfers. All this, you end up building up your contamination load, and it can be a problem. You need to be very careful if you're going to be doing this.
Now, what type of environment? I've had a chance to brew with Jamil before, and it's like, if his grass is wet, it's not zen enough, or something. The environment is important. So, right. Is there an environment to take this out of the carboy? I mean, you're doing it outside, or you're doing it in the garage, because you're transferring the yeast. This is when the contaminants can get in.
Good point. Avoid wind, and if you can, an open flame that will lift. You work next to an open flame, it'll lift all the stuff away and kind of give you a clear airspace around where you're working. And wind is probably the worst thing for brewing. I can brew in the rain. I can't brew in the wind. The wind drives me nuts, because it brings a lot of material from plants and stuff. They travel on the wind, and that's how it gets into your beer and ruins things.
So you brew outdoors then?
I do.
Trying to get him to brew indoors, but he just won't do it.
No.
So now I've got this, giant slurry of yeast in a container. It's time to reuse it. Mm-hmm. We already know that it's going to last, maybe I brew the next week. The first question is, how soon do I have to brew before I, can't use this anymore? It's dying in the bottle.
Well, generally, within the first week, you're okay. So if you harvest your yeast on a Saturday or a Sunday, and then you decide you're going to brew the next Friday, Saturday, Sunday, that's fine. You don't even need to add a starter or anything like that. You're just going to harvest the appropriate amount of yeast, pitch that in, and you're off to the races. Of course, that's if what you're doing with your yeast in the first place is healthy. The yeast that you select, you want to have healthy yeast has been properly treated. You don't want to get some package of yeast that expired 2 years ago, and you're throwing it in this barley wine, and it seems like it's sort of fermented, and then you're taking the yeast off of that, and then it's it stinks because I don't know, smells like a wet dog for some reason. You don't really know why, and then you're going to select this yeast and you're going to throw it into another batch of wort. Big mistake. If the beer
selection of the yeast is a key point. You want to select the right yeast to repitch.
Mm-hmm. Well,
how do you do that? I mean, I don't have a microscope.
Well, if the beer you're harvesting from doesn't taste great, doesn't there may be recipe flaws, but if the fermentation wasn't perfect and wonderful, don't reuse the yeast.
Yeah, if it doesn't taste clean.
Yep.
Don't take a chance.
Yeah, that's a big mistake. And of course,
don't repitch your trub from the previous batch.
Oh, well, easier said than done. So I meant, if you don't have a conical, you're taking the yeast and your trub and your hop matter. Let's say you previously brewed a pale ale. You got hops, you got hot break, you got cold break, you got everything. How do you separate that from the yeast?
Excellent question. And I know you know the answer to this, but good job setting me up with the softball here.
Well, actually, I really want to know this. I've been having some issues with this myself.
Well, and it's actually pretty easy. It's just people have questions as to what does it look like. I think we need to do our first video for people, and there's probably some videos out there on the internet or some pages on it with photos on it. But essentially, you've got your container of yeast, right? And what I like to do is use a big enough container that the yeast portion is maybe, once it settles out, is maybe a quarter or less of the container. A third is kind of pushing it, but a quarter or less. So if I got a 2-liter container, I've got maybe 500 mils of yeast solids at the bottom. The beer liquid may be higher at that point. What I do is first off, I'll decant the beer off the yeast, and then I'll put sterile water in. and I'll take a volume of sterile water, usually about 4 times as much water as yeast, or 3 to 4 times, depends on how much room, of course, you got in this container. You pour that in, shake it up, shake it real good until all the clumps, especially if you're using a flocculent yeast like an English ale yeast will tend to be real clumpy.
Oh yeah.
Break that up real good, and then just set it down on the counter. And what you'll find is if you've used enough water to thin it out enough, what you'll find is within 10 minutes, you'll see little black bits, the braun huff, and all that stuff will settle to the bottom, bits of hops, break material, and dead yeast cells are going to drop to the bottom of the container fairly quickly. First 10 minutes. And what you'll see is you'll have this little layer of dark crud on the bottom, and then you'll have this milky, kind of white-looking stuff in suspension in the water above. That's the yeast that you're going to use.
Okay.
Okay, it's in that portion.
I think I understand where you're going with this, but the difficult thing is how is any normal home brewer, professional brewer for that matter, calculate the amount to repitch back in to his 5 or 10 or whatever gallon batch?
Well, and that's tricky. I mean, the only real way you can do it is by measuring the amount of cells you have, and that is with a microscope and hemocetometer. Or you can do it with a mass spec. Sometimes that will work, but most people don't have either of those available.
Do you like the jelly beans in the mason jar? Just kind of guess how many.
Exactly. Well, and that's part of it. Okay, so a lot of people have seen a White Labs vial, right?
Right.
Okay. The amount of yeast in a White Labs vial is about 120 billion cells. It fills about 25 milliliters, 27 milliliters of a 35 milliliter vessel. That the whole tube is 35 milliliters, and that it'll fill about that much of the vessel. If you go on, and I make no money off of this, so I only mention it to help people out. www.mrmalty.com. There's a yeast pitching calculator there, and the yeast pitching calculator will work with repitching yeast. And so the only reason I mentioned the White Labs vials is that is pretty much pure yeast, very low non-yeast percentage, and it's tightly packed in that vial. I mean, it's real tight in there. If you go to the yeast pitching calculator and there's defaults there for non-yeast percentage and thickness of yeast. Right. If you move those to the extremes with the least amount of non-yeast and the tightest pack, you'll find that the volume of yeast equals what's in that White Labs solid portion there,
chunky.
So the two exactly match. If you just use the defaults, that tends to be what most people get when they think they got real thick yeast. Okay, so you've harvested your yeast out of the carboy, you've got it in your container, you put it in the fridge, and you wait the week. At the end of the week, the yeast at the bottom there, it's got probably the defaults of non-yeast and thickness. So don't mess with the defaults. They're pretty close.
Okay.
Now, yeast cells change size based on their condition and the environment and everything that's happened to them. So they can be bigger or smaller depending on a lot of different factors. And strains will even have an effect, different strains. So it's an approximation, but it's pretty darn close. Now, what you put in the beer that you want to brew, and you put in your harvest date, and it'll tell you how much yeast you need to have. And let's say in this case it'll be like 100 mils, right?
Right.
Like that container next to you, Nick, that you brought in. That's 2 liters, right?
Nasty looking stuff, yeah.
Right. So. Half of that is a liter, and 1/10 of that would be 100 mils. Depending on the container you have. That's one other thing. The taller and narrower the container is when you add water and shake it up, the easier you're going to see the stratification of the bad stuff and the good stuff.
Okay.
So what I like to do is look at the container and see how much yeast solids I have in there. So in our previous example, we're saying we had 500 mils of solids, right?
Right.
And we were going to add water to it.
Right.
So 500 mils, I know I need 1/5 of that amount. I decant all the beer off, okay, and I've got the 500 mils of solids. It's all slopped around on the sides now.
Right.
I add my water and I shake it up, and I let it start to settle. I need 1/5 of whatever volume that is. I need 1/5 of it, okay, after 10 minutes. You don't want to let it really settle out, but while it's still in solution like that, 1/5.
Okay.
So if I've added, a liter of water to my 500 mils of yeast, and I've got 1,500 mils of liquid slurry,
you still need 1/5 of that.
I need 1/5 of that, 300 mils.
There you go.
Okay, so that tells you how much to pitch, and you can just take that 300 mils, pour it into your beer, and you're good to go. See, you can let that yeast settle back out, or you can what I like to do with the remainder is transfer it to another sterile container, leave that the dead cells and all the crud off the bottom, leave that, toss that away and go with clean cells in the other.
That's why I like using a graduated cylinder or something for my slurry, because you get an idea how much is in there, and then okay, if I swirl it up, I had 250 mils or 500 a thick yeast slurry.
Right.
You can do the math from there.
And you could take a graduated cylinder,
Yeah.
and mayonnaise jar like John's using, and just mark the jar. 50, 100 mils, 150, 200, and that should give you a pretty good idea of what you're doing. Now, Mr. Dorman was asking about, why wouldn't you just toss, everything into the next beer?
It's easy.
Well, the problem is, if you pitch too much yeast or too little yeast, right off of that, you're gonna affect the flavor. Yeast need to grow, to develop the flavors that are in beer. The cleanest of beers have esters in them. A lager is not lacking in esters. It's just a different set, more restrained, but it's there. If you got rid of that stuff, it would taste horrible. So you need the yeast to grow and develop those flavors in your beer. So that's why one of the most important reasons for pitching the right amount. You don't want to over pitch, because you're gonna impact those flavors. You can actually decrease attenuation. A lot of people say, well, it's not attenuating enough. I'll just add more yeast. I'll add more yeast. I'll go with a really big pitch. You get to a certain point where it actually has a negative impact on attenuation. The yeast will not attenuate as much if you get too much yeast in there. The other factor is that yeast cake, after fermentation, if you just toss another beer on there, a lot of those cells are already dying. There is material in there that's dead and dying, and do you really want to add that to your beer? Do you want to add dead yeast to your beer? Not necessarily.
You don't
the
want
best choice.
Cascade hops in your residue in your Munich Helles.
Exactly.
Okay.
Well, and that brings up another point, which is your sequence of repitching. Do you go, you generally want to go from a lower gravity beer to a higher gravity beer, or lower alcohol beer to a higher alcohol beer. You generally want to go from lower IBUs to higher IBUs, or, from paler to darker.
How many times can you do it before it becomes maybe toxic? You picked up bacteria, something.
Well, that's going to depend on your process, how well you're treating the yeast, things like that. How much contamination you've picked up.
Sing to them.
Right, exactly. Stroke them, rub them.
All right.
Quality in equals quality out.
And the thing that for me, the first pitch is good. The second pitch is better. The third pitch is magical. Fourth and fifth are kind of along those lines. By the sixth, I don't know. It just depends on, how clean your process is. There are breweries that go many, many generations. I tend to cut it off around, the fourth or the fifth or maybe the sixth pitch. And usually by that time, I've run out of beer styles that I want to brew.
Right.
Now, if you're brewing the same beer every week, you can easily go quite a bit longer. But, creativity's sake, for most homebrewers, you kind of give up after you've done 5 batches on the same type of yeast. And one of the things to keep in mind is, as these yeast pitches grow, from one pitch to the next, you've got, several times the amount of yeast you need, and you could use that for multiple types of beer, and you can make from one. I usually split it into two, and then you could be making 4 batches off that third pitch,
right,
or more.
Okay, well, seems to answer a lot of questions there. Got a bunch more for you.
Okay, well, let's do this. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll get into some more questions about repitching yeast.
Sure.
Keep your carboy cap on. This is Brew Strong. We'll be right back.
Since 1921, Muntons has been a provider of quality malted grain and extracts.
What did he just say? What did he say?
That's 90 years of locally sourced grain for home brewers and professional brewers alike. All farmed within 50 miles of our malt houses.
What? I can't understand what this is. The last part.
Whole and crushed malts, including wheat and peated malt, liquid extract, hopped and unhopped, as well as dried malt extract. Everything from beginner home brewer kits to all the ingredients an advanced home brewer needs.
Something about trains? What language does this guy speak? He's from Austria.
Muntons is proudly serving brewers in 54 countries and honoured to be a leader in malting.
Can you understand this guy? No. That's a really weird language.
Ask for Muntons malt and malt extract at your local home brew shop.
Muntons, for brewing, distilling, and baking. Quality malted grain and extract for 90 years. Make your malt Muntons.
When I order a beer, I want my server to know more about it than I do. I want someone who enjoys good beer and loves helping others enjoy it too. I want someone who knows how to pour a perfect pint for every beer style. I want a Cicerone.
The Cicerone Certification Program is creating the type of people who help you enjoy great beer. Home brewers and craft beer lovers know beer is more flavorful and complex than ever, and it takes some serious knowledge to store and serve beer right. Cicerones know beer. There are 3 levels in the Cicerone program: Certified Beer Server, Certified Cicerone, and Master Cicerone. Cicerones are truly the sommeliers of beer. The best beer locations have a Certified Cicerone on staff. Relaxed and unpretentious. Cicerones are tested on storing and serving beer, beer styles, flavor and tasting, the brewing process and ingredients, and pairing food with beer. Learn more about your next beer guide at cicerone.org. Certified Cicerone, because it takes top talent to present a perfect pint.
Hi, this is Push from the Brewing Network, and I want to tell you about the Brewmaster's Warehouse and how you can get 10% off your next order. I'm a pretty techie guy, but I've never seen an online store like this. It's awesome. Go to brewmasterswarehouse.com and click on Brew Builder. You can whip up a custom recipe so easily even Sven could do it. Seriously, it's slick. You can share your recipe with your own logo and notes to the Brewmasters database if you want, and the best part, it keeps a running tally of the beer you're building while you're doing it. Then bam, click Buy Recipe, and your cart is filled and ready to go with helpful suggestions in case you forgot something. This thing is amazing. Brewmasters Warehouse is run the way a home brewer would do it, with great service, fast turnaround, and $6.99 flat rate shipping. Brewmaster's Warehouse and the Brew Builder blew me away. Check it out today at brewmasterswarehouse.com. I'm serious. And don't forget to put BNARMY in the discount code box for 10% off your order. Check out brewmasterswarehouse.com. Cheers.
Do you support the Brewing Network? Do you brew your own? Are you looking for an economical, fun, and legal way to do both? Subscribe to Brew Your Own magazine and do just that. All year long, Brew Your Own will surprise you, entertain you, and educate you with articles on beer and brewing from authors like the Brewing Network's very own Jamel Zainasheff and John Palmer. Each issue is a full pint of brewing techniques, homebrew stories, tips and photos, projects to make yourself, and recipes for the avid home brewer. Get your tough questions answered by Mr. Wizard, and polish your style accuracy with Jamel. A portion of every subscription goes to the Brewing Network, so subscribe today at byo.com/Brewing Network, or just click the BYO logo on the Brewing Network homepage and support a fantastic hobby and your favorite broadcaster. Brew Your Own, the how-to homebrew beer magazine.
You're listening to the Brewing Network.
Back to the beer guys that make other beer guys look like wine guys. Brew strong.
The boil seems like such a simple thing, but you know when you get a geek like John Palmer involved, there's a lot more to it than just firing up the burner. Yes, I'm sure you're thinking, I already know how to boil wort, but bear with us, and I think you might learn something you never knew about the boil from this following segment. That's a good question. I like that question because, you know, we all, myself included, we're like, all right, well, we boil it, and then, you know, it's sanitizing it and concentrating it.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, and, yeah, maybe the hops, and, yeah, and then we cool it down, we put it in. Okay, boil done. You know, it's a much more complex topic than that, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you have your grain bill that defines your flavors of the beer you're making, but to a large extent, a lot of those flavors in the beer are created in the boil from the ingredients. So, yeah, we can get quite complex in it.
Okay, well, and before we go much further into the boil itself, you know, a simmer is where just like little bubbles are rising to the surface.
Yeah, the surface looks really kind of flat, just slightly agitated from the little bubbles popping up, but flat.
Rolling boil is when, and a boil is where I guess you're getting, you know, more surface action, larger bubbles or greater volume of bubbles. And then a rolling boil is where you see actually, you know, like little lumps in the surface, round lumps in the surface where you can see the wort turning over. And that's what you mean by a rolling boil. And then a violent boil would be, you know, where stuff's leaping out and hitting you in the face. You can wort flying all over the place, and you know, you can't control your firing of wort all over the place.
Yeah, if your boil's that heavy, you're probably going to get some scorching.
Yeah, and it just doesn't do a whole lot of good. Well, and let's we've got on the phone with us Jeremy Robb from Eagle Rock Brewery. Jeremy, you there?
Yeah, hey guys.
Hey, thanks for joining us.
Yeah,
hey, Jeremy.
No problem.
So, real quickly, give us a real quick breakdown of your background and Eagle Rock Brewery.
Well, started out like most small brewers out there as a home brewer. My dad and I have been brewing pretty seriously together for about, 7 years now. And I guess like every home brewer, you just, you get more into it. You start geeking out, getting the cooler equipment, and start doing all the research and background and understanding the process. And we got kicked out of the kitchen into the garage, and then eventually out of the garage into the place we have now.
So you've essentially turned a really good hobby into
work.
That's right. It's funny because I always joke that I used to be in the film industry, and I was always kind of complaining about the work-life balance and not having much of a life outside of work. But so now, I have absolutely
even worse
no life outside of work.
But you make some really good beer, though.
Oh, well, thank you.
All right. So, Jeremy, what are brewers looking for out of the boil? I mean, what's the whole purpose of boiling the wort?
Well, as most people know, the really main purposes are sterilizing the wort, killing off any of the, especially lactobacillus, which is on the grain after milling, and it survives through mashing. So to kill off that, any other bacteria that might be present, concentrating the wort, evaporating excess water, so concentrating your sugars and creating flavor and color, getting that melanoidin production, getting some color development into your wort, and also increasing your gravity. And then really one of the the biggest things besides those is isomerizing your hops and solubilizing the hop components after they're isomerized and
getting the bitterness in. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that was one of the big differences, from homebrewing and using, starting out on the kitchen stove and really having a anemic boil, not having the power to get a good rolling boil, and then going into our garage and having the turkey burners, those Cajun cookers that a lot of homebrewers have, and that's basically a direct fire method where the flames are hitting the bottom of the kettle and heating it up. But then the biggest difference for us in the boil going to the commercial-sized system, a 15-barrel system, is our kettle is steam-fired. And so, there's some differences there as far as, with a direct flame, you're getting a lot more caramelization.
A lot more intensity, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a big difference for us in moving up to a bigger size system.
And how did you? I mean, did you see or taste differences in the beer? From the homebrew scale to the commercial scale at first.
Yeah, we did. We sort of anticipated we were going to run into some unexpected results just from moving to the bigger system. And so we did a half batch for our very first batch. And what we noticed was we got a lot more bitterness than we even anticipated, using brewing software and calculations to figure out the hopping rate for the bigger system. But even then, it was more bitter than we had anticipated. Yeah, so I guess part of that is probably the surface to volume ratio being less.
Much better, yeah. Right.
And then also the kind of more intense heat, the more intense solubilization of the hops components. So, but yeah, that was a big difference, and it took a little bit of adjustment, but we figured it out pretty quick, and we're able to use that half batch and blend it with another. We did a less bitter batch based on what we had learned, and then blended the two to get our target beer. So,
how deep is your boil when you're doing a full batch?
Do you mean like depth as far as from the surface to the bottom of the kettle?
Right.
It ranges from, if we really get a good efficient mash and we have a full kettle, it's about between 4 and 5 feet deep.
Okay. Yeah.
Or if we don't get such an efficient mash and our gravity isn't as high as we need, then we'll get a little bit low, 3 to 4 feet, I'd say.
I see. So, okay.
Ranging anywhere from that.
Mm-hmm.
And what length boil are you doing there? One of the parts of the question that Scott had was, some breweries, they're doing 90 minutes, some breweries are doing 60 minutes, some breweries, what length boil are you using and why?
Mostly we're using a 60-minute boil, and the reason there is just because we don't want to unnecessarily use more energy than we have to, to keep the boil going. There are a couple beers that we do a longer boil with. We do a 90-minute boil. We just did our first specialty beer, which is an Imperial Amber Wit beer, and it's like a bigger version of a wit beer, but with a lot of Munich malt as the base malt instead of Pilsner malt. So, but the objective there was to do a longer boil to kind of get more kettle caramelization and increase that malt character. So,
Okay, yeah, you get a lot more melanoidin development, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, John, you've been fond of saying, well, okay, you don't technically get caramelization in the kettle. You get melanoidins, and I always say, well, they taste like caramel type of compounds.
That's true. They are, the compounds are very similar, but you need temperatures in excess of 220 to get caramelization as opposed to melanoidin formation.
Mm-hmm.
And you need a much, technically you need
oxygen as well, don't you? Right.
Not so much oxygen, but you need a very high concentration of sugar, almost like really boiling malt extract would give you that level of that ratio of moisture to sugar necessary for true caramelization. But
what
melanoid
about
formation?
Sorry, I have actually a related question though, because what about with some of the homebrews we had done in the past, we would put a little bit of wort into the bottom of the kettle and really boil that hard until it started to caramelize, or maybe not caramelize.
Yeah, I think you're probably getting it there because you've got a very high heat, for a small volume of liquid, and you can, and certainly at the edges of that, you can achieve these 220 type temperatures over the 212 the boil.
Well, especially if you get it down to a syrup. I know if you take the first runnings, a wee heavy, you take the first runnings and you boil that down. When it gets to a syrup, the thing about I believe the thicker a liquid is, the higher the viscosity, the more heat it takes to
the
boil.
Boiling point goes up. Yeah.
So your boiling point rises. So you do reach that 220.
Yeah.
And then there's plenty of oxygen and the sugars are concentrated, and so you're truly getting caramelization at that point, right? Just not when you have a full kettle. Then you get some of those flavors, but
is by melanoidin formation instead.
Right.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
But the hydrostatic pressure, when you get to 5 foot depth, that also increases the boiling point of the liquid by a couple degrees. And so that can change your melanoidins, and it can improve your isomerization because the rate of isomerization does increase linearly with temperature.
Right.
But you're only going to get a couple degrees. You're not going to get
Now, all right. So one of the things that you develop over a longer boil is more color, more melanoidin formation. I think Chris Colby at BYO, he did an experiment where he boiled like an all Pilsner malt wort. Boiled, some of it for 60 minutes, some of it for 90 minutes, or whatever, and went out to like 3 hours and compared the colors, and really didn't have a whole lot of color development. Now, I think that that's absolutely true. So you don't get a whole lot, but it also depends on the wort, right? The different components you might have in a wort, and that may have an effect as well. Is that true or no?
I would think so.
Yeah. It is true. The different wort compositions will encourage different reactions.
And so it even depends on the proteins present, right?
Right. You'll get different melanoidins, different flavors from Munich malt, such as Jeremy was saying with the Imperial Amber Wit, versus a pale malt, because they're a little different protein, a little different. What's the word I want to? The combination of proteins. As those form melanoidins with the sugars, you're going to have different sugars in a darker colored malt. And those will combine with the higher melanoidins and produce different characteristic flavors. So it's, the characteristic flavors that we get from different malts are in great part a result of the melanoidins those malts form in the boil. So it varies with the color, and it varies with the amount of heat you put in, the intensity of the boil, the length of the boil, the gravity of the boil. all those combine to drive the different melanoid formations.
Mm-hmm. And so perhaps if you did a protein rest, you'd get a different set of melanoid characteristics, probably generally the same, but maybe slightly different, or maybe more rapid or less rapid formation of melanoids. I mean, I'm not sure if that's melanoids are long proteins, short proteins, or what.
Well, I think what it drives is that when you are trying to clone a beer, a commercial beer, kind of look online or call the brewer, or try to get some feel for how they're conducting the making of that beer. Are they using a long boil? Are they using a low gravity wort and boiling it for a long time to a high gravity? Are they doing a fairly high gravity wort with a short boil to get to their OG? If the more that you mimic the way that boil is conducted, the closer you will get to achieving the same flavor, because those melanoid paths are very technique dependent.
Okay. Well, let's do this. Let's take a short break. Back after this.
Keep your carboy cap on. This is Brew Strong.
We'll be right back.
When Blickman Engineering set out to design a great brewing stand, they knew it had to be strong, adaptable, and last for a lifetime. The top-tier brewing stand is now proudly available at BlickmanEngineering.com. It grows with your brewing skills and equipment. Start with 5-gallon coolers on its heavy-gauge stainless steel shelves. Then move all the way up to 30-gallon pots on the high-output burner tiers. Speaking of burners, the custom Blickman Engineering top-tier burners are extremely powerful, efficient, and amazingly quiet. They have safety stops to center your pot, and they'll last a lifetime and won't rust. The top-tier brewing stand allows virtually infinite combinations from traditional gravity systems to 2 tiers to completely horizontal. Configure your stand the way you want and have the freedom to change it at any time in the future. Your brewing stand should adapt with you, not force you to learn a new process. Visit BlickmanEngineering.com today to configure your top-tier brewing stand and to find a local Blickman retailer. You'll be surprised with all the flexible features and the competitive price. Start brewing with Blickman from the top tier.
Williams Brewing is your online resource for prompt delivery of quality home brewing supplies. Since 1979, Williams Brewing has offered the finest equipment and freshest ingredients and the best customer service in the business. Cut hours off your brewing sessions by using one of our 11 varieties of famous Williams malt extract. Our Williams Belgian Pale Extract is mashed with pure Belgian 2-row malt and a small percentage of Belgian wheat malt for an authentic Belgian character you just can't get from other extracts. Or check out our unique fermenters, 2.5-gallon kegs, paintball tank-based draft beer equipment, bottling aids, and much more. We even have our own line of precision hydrometers. Go to WilliamsBrewing.com to browse our vast selection. That's WilliamsBrewing.com. Orders placed by 3:30 p.m. Pacific Time ship the same day. Brewing is easy. The Williams way.
Hey, what are you doing, man?
Writing a review of WLP 400.
What? You're reviewing yeast?
Yeah. White Labs has home brewer reviews of all their strains. Are you new to these interwebs? Check it out.
That's awesome.
White Labs, your source for great yeast, invites all brewers to visit whitelabs.com to read and write your own reviews of all their yeast strains. Get real-world tips and tricks from other brewers who have made the most of their vials and post your own experiences. It's another way White Labs brings you closer to the best yeast on the planet.
And send. There you go.
You misspelled flocculate, dude.
What? Mother...
White Labs. It's all in the vial.
Organic ingredients. Fresh, clean, good for you, good for the planet. Seven Bridges has the best selection of organic ingredients, including over 27 varieties of organic hops at breworganic.com. Join their mailing list for special deals and regular updates. They've been brewing organic and serving organic brewers for 13 years. They can help you brew great organic beer. And Seven Bridges is the proud host of the 4th Annual National Organic Brewing Challenge, the only BJCP-sanctioned nationwide brewing competition just for organic beers. Take the challenge this fall for a chance to win great prizes, including stainless steel brew kettles and organic brewing ingredients. This year, the challenge will be judged in 2 locations: on the East Coast at Capital City Brewing in Arlington, Virginia, and on the West Coast at Gordon Biersch in San Jose, California. For complete details, visit breworganic.com/competition. Seven Bridges is cooperatively owned in awesome Santa Cruz, California. Everyone there is dedicated to great beer and people-friendly business practices. They offer environmentally friendly, fair trade, and fair wage brewing products whenever possible. Seven Bridges, breworganic.com.
This is www.thebrewingnetwork.com. Sit down next to it, grab yourself a paper towel, and watch those yeast have sex.
You're listening to the Brewing Network.
Back to the two guys that know how to turn beer into beer. This is Brew Strong.
Let's wrap up this Best of Brew Strong show with some fresh questions from the email. If you have a question you want to answer on the show, you can email John and I at brewstrong@thebrewingnetwork.com. This first email is from Ben. He says, I brewed an American steam beer a couple of months ago. The gravity came in really low. We decided to pitch the yeast anyway and bottled it up. After 6 weeks, there is still no evidence of carbonation. Is the beer a lost cause, or is there any way to revive it? Well, Ben, let's kind of break down this question a little bit. That's a steam beer. I think you're essentially using a lager yeast. The gravity came in really low. That shouldn't necessarily be a problem in getting carbonation. And as a matter of fact, it should result in healthier yeast at the end of fermentation. So if you're counting on that yeast, it should still be in pretty good shape. The only thing I would think is if the gravity was really low and there's very little in residual sugars left, if you did not add additional sugars for carbonation, then obviously that would be the problem. I'm assuming you did add sugar for carbonation, so that isn't necessarily the reason it didn't carbonate. You decided to pitch yeast anyway and bottled it up. If you pitched fresh yeast, if you waited a long time between your fermentation and bottling, then you should have added fresh yeast. The other problem, after 6 weeks, there's still no evidence of carbonation. There's absolutely zero evidence of carbonation. I would start to wonder if the yeast is viable in there, or if you added the sugar, or if there's total leaks in the caps. If you're using something like Grolsch bottles and they're really bad seals, you could have that problem there. But if there's some evidence of carbonation, then I'd say the yeast was just weak, and you might give it some more time, move it some more warmer. One of the things when you are bottle conditioning beer, you want to leave them all with some air space between them, so the air can circulate, so the temperature is even on all the bottles, and you want to keep it pretty warm. Keep it up fermentation temperature or more. If you're keeping these down in the 50s or 60s, it's going to take a long, long time to carbonate. Before you do anything drastic, I would take a bottle or two and move them to an area that's about 80 plus degrees, 80, 85 degrees Fahrenheit. Leave it there for a good week or more, and then see if that beer carbonates. If it does, then I think all your other beers, I would just move them somewhere warmer, maybe not that warm, but somewhere warmer, and give it some more time, and you'll probably be there. If that doesn't get it to carbonate, then you can try adding a little more yeast to one of those and try again the 80-degree trick and see if that does it. If not, then yeast and more sugar and give it a try. You can add more to, especially if you work with dry yeast. You can just sprinkle a little more in each. Work up rehydrate your dry yeast and then add a little bit to each bottle. You could try that, or same thing with sugar. You can use a simple sugar, and that should do it. So there's some way to revive it. That's probably your best bet. Hope that helps, Ben. All right, the next question comes from Quaker. He's living in China, and he says, Ni hao from Chengdu, China. I'm an expat on assignment and tired of local loggers. I bought some minimal equipment, yada yada. He has a problem in that he doesn't have fermenters, and he doesn't want to split them into a couple of carboys. He was thinking of trying to ferment in the kettle. Any insights or concerns? Here's what I've considered thus far. Hop matter, he's bought some hop bags, and he is going to use those to pull the hops out. All right. Oxygenation, no stone system here, nor can I cap and shake it. So sanitized whisk it must be after cooling off, I assume. Sanitation, lid will be on while bringing to a boil, and I could put it on again for the last few minutes or so to sanitize with steam. Chilling, no chiller here, so I will use the tub as a water bath. And even if I opt for a different fermentation vessel, where it will still rest in the kettle for several hours. The only issue I see is hot and cold breaks. It's just goodness for the yeast. If haze is the only downside, I'm completely okay with it. Since I'm brewing tonight or tomorrow, I'll probably be committed on the first batch before your next Q&A show, but still interested in your thoughts. All right, first batch is a porter, purposely selected, so it's most likely to hide the flaws from the first attempt here. ZZ, that's thanks, not hugs and kisses, Quaker. Quaker. All right, so I've got some friends that do ferment in their kettle. A good friend down in San Diego, as a matter of fact, Randy, he has fermented, second round award-winning light lager in his brew kettle. So it's quite possible to get excellent results from fermenting in the kettle. I think it's not necessarily as big an issue as you might think. It seems a little unusual to most folks, but really, I think you've thought through some of the issues there. The hop matter, okay, you got that taken care of. Oxygenation, that's the one that I would worry about here. If you're a sanitized whisk, you're going to pull in, no matter how careful you are. Anytime you lift that lid off after boiling, dust is going to settle in there with wild yeast and bacteria. And it's really, if you ferment the beer and then drink it quickly, it should be fine. But if you want really the best beer, I'd avoid getting any sort of dust settling in there. Which as soon as you lift that lid, you're going to start getting that. In China, I gotta imagine they got aquarium pumps, and I think you can buy a small sanitized or a small sterile filter for the pump, and just pump air into the kettle and let that go. I think that will it'll make a huge difference compared to doing nothing, or allowing dust to settle in your beer while you're whisking it. So give that a try. You should be able to do that. No oxygen tank, but give that a try with the aquarium pump. Should work well. A lot of people do that very thing. Sanitation, if you don't have to worry about keeping the lid on while bringing it to a boil. You just want to keep it nice and hot, keep it clean. And I set mine near the burner and heat it up that way, and that actually just pasteurizes it. And then, like you're saying, put it on for the last minute or so, and that'll sanitize it with some steam. Steam is a very effective sanitizer. It carries a lot of energy in the steam, and when that steam turns to water, and when it touches something, it releases all that heat, and that's why it's such a great way of sanitizing things. And chilling, no chiller here. Yeah, I think you're okay with that. It's great if you can chill rapidly, for sanitary reasons. But if you're real careful, I think you'll be okay. Definitely if you're gonna take the lid off and whisk it, then slow cooling over overnight or something like that is going to be a killer. So I would just be careful there. And hot and cold break. Well, yes, I mean there's people point to break material being useful for yeast in certain conditions, things like that. But when you have you only need an invisible amount of it for that effect to happen. When you have big piles of it, the drawback is there are negatives to it, but probably when you're just doing a batch. you're just not going to be able to repitch that yeast. You're going to have so much true mixed in with the yeast that it's really difficult to reuse the yeast later on. So that I think would be one of the main downsides. But especially if you're sticking with dark beers, you don't have to worry about haze. So I think it's a good solution. I think it has a lot of positives. One being not transferring it to another vessel and therefore exposing your wort to contamination there. So you'll gain something as far as that goes. So I think it's a good solution, and I wish you the best. Thanks for writing in. Our next question comes from Jess in Maui. Jess says, Aloha. I missed the last Brew Strong, but I want to get a question in for next time maybe. I was wondering if I could brew a high-gravity wort, say 1.110, using all grain and throwing some DME into the boil. I don't have enough mash tun space to get to 1.110. Let's see, and then take the 5 gallons that would normally go into one carboy and split it into 2 carboys and top each off with water, yielding 2 5-gallon batches around 10:55. Could I just double everything in the recipe, and would the recipe turn out the same? Would be awesome if so. I'd love to get 10 gallons in one brew day. Thanks, Jess. Well, Jess, to some extent you can, and to some extent you can't. Think of it this way. It's like when doing a partial boil. So when somebody's got only a small brew pot and they can only fit half of the wort in there, the final wort volume in there, and they're trying to brew a 1055, and they end up doing a concentrated boil and then adding water later on. So all the problems that are associated with partial boil, that's what you're going to have, and it's essentially the same thing. So the problems would be hop utilization. That is going to drop, so you're going to have to really increase the amount of hops to get the same bittering. Your head retention and things like that might suffer as well. You're going to precipitate out a lot of proteins, and flavor. If you you're boiling something more concentrated, you can develop more flavor. So the flavor profile of the wort is going to change a little bit. So it can be done. One of the things that you won't be able to do, or well, maybe I guess you could do if, depending on your gravity, if you're talking about throwing DME into the boil already, you can add that boil at the end. That's one of the things that partial boil brewers do, is they hold out a lot of their extract, whether it's DME or LME, and they add it near the end of the boil. So the earlier part of the boil is done at a lower gravity. It gives better hop utilization, things like that. And so you add that DME near the end, essentially just to sanitize it, and you're good to go. So if you want to read up on partial boils, it's in John's excellent How to Brew that talks about partial boils, and you can get a lot of information off the internet and from the forums. A lot of people have done partial boils, and there's a lot of information out there on that. And, other than that, I see no reason why you couldn't do that and get yourself 10 gallons one brew day. So thanks for your email, and enjoy. All right, and then let's wrap this up with a email from Michael. Michael's in Yokosuka, Japan, and he was asking, what should a home brewer consider when they try to double a recipe? I'm getting ready to brew the Can You Brew It recipe for Rogue's Dead Guy next weekend, and I'm ready to rock. I just now finished a very fine bottle of Double Dead Guy Ale from 2009, and now I'm sitting here rethinking my recipe. I noticed from the bottle that they use Cascade in the double version rather than staying with the Pearl and Centennial that they use in their standard recipe. Now I ask, why that change? Cranking the recipe up to the stated original gravity at 19 Plato is very easy in any brewing software, but I'm thinking, what else should one consider when modifying a recipe to account for anticipated changes in hop utilization, flavor development, malt hop balance, yeast attenuation, and even their survival in a more hostile environment, etc.? Not just with Dead Guy, but in any recipe. Lastly, any specific thoughts on modifications to the Can You Brew It recipe to make it a double Dead Guy? Great show, guys. Can't wait to be able to catch you all in real time when I can eventually return to the States. Got to wait until the statute of limitations runs out. All right, so Michael, that's a great question. I think really we could do a whole show on this. That's probably a good idea. But I'll try and help you out here. There's multiple ways of brewing a double version of a beer. One would be to just take everything and double it. Some brewers do that. I think Deschutes, when they do their Black Butte Porter double version, the 20, 21, 22, they're essentially just doubling that Black Butte recipe. Now, they do make some small changes, I've been told, but essentially you're just doubling it, every ingredient. The second way of doing it is to just increase your base grains to bring the gravity up to your target and leave the specialty grains the same. And there you're just essentially increasing alcohol, you're increasing body, increasing some other things, but a lot of the specialty malts, the level remains the same. So two different ways of doing it. The danger of doing, when you're just ratcheting up the gravity, then you just need to adjust your bittering, and you're pretty much good to go. You adjust your fermentation, you're pretty much good to go. If you're doubling, the danger is sometimes when you've got a recipe that's already fairly extreme on some specialty malts, and you double that, it can really become way too heavy. It becomes syrupy, become acrid, become harsh. I mean, there's a lot of things that can kind of go wrong there. It's kind of cool to double a recipe and see what it turns out like, but it's a lot of times it just isn't the best drinking beer. As far as that goes, Rogue Dead Guy doesn't have a whole lot of specialty malts, so you can actually be okay doubling something like that. One of the things you need to look out for when you are bringing the recipe up: higher gravity, less hop utilization, and you're going to need to adjust for that. Same thing goes for the yeast. You already know this. Bigger pitching rates are involved. When you get to a really high gravity wort, you may want to bump your pitching rate up a little bit more and do a second dose of oxygen about 12 hours in, and that's going to ensure that thing attenuates out completely. You may also need to adjust your pitching rate or your fermentation temperatures a little bit to avoid getting really fusely alcohols. Start a little lower, a degree or two lower at the start, and make sure you ramp up the temperature at the end to get full attenuation on that thing. But those are some of the tips on doubling up a recipe. I think that's something worthy of a whole show. So maybe we'll do that one fairly soon. But hopefully that'll carry you through your brew session. Thanks for writing in, Michael, and hope to see you in the U.S. again soon. All right, so that's a wrap on our best of Brew Strong, and I hope you enjoyed it. There's a lot of good information in there, and a couple of new nuggets of goodness, hopefully, that you can chew on a second time. And if you get a chance, make sure you check out all our fine sponsors and show them that you love them as much as we do, because they make this show possible. Until then, brew strong.